Hello and welcome everybody. Good afternoon from Sri Lanka. And thank you for joining and being a part of this. Hello to everyone joining us from Facebook. This is the third of 4 workshops that we have planned for this week under the theme of climate and disaster risk management, risk transfer, and related laws and policies. This workshop series is part of a project that we have on our multi-actor partnerships in the context of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. And as part of this partnership, we are very happy that we also have ICSC, one of our consortium members, on board with us to share his experience. And today's workshop will focus on integrating climate and disaster risk transfer, international policies, and climate commitments. Before we start, I would like to kindly request just 3 housekeeping rules from us. Please do keep your mics muted at all times, and unless you are speaking. And it would also be great if you could rename yourself on Zoom to indicate your name and the country you're joining us from. I've just written that on the chat. If you are unsure how to do so, just hover over your name on the participants list. There's a tab button which says more. Once you click on that, there's an option to rename. And finally, we have a registration form for the day, as we did on previous days. The link is again on the chat. Please do fill that out so we can understand enough who is present here. Before we, so Mr. Razak, Dr. Razak's mic is turned on. That's great. So without further ado, I think we can get started. So, and we hope to have a really great discussion today. So to start off the proceedings today, I would like to invite Dr. Sunimal Jayatunga, the Additional Secretary to the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka. Dr. Jayatunga.
Thank you, Shanasia. Good afternoon and good morning who are joining from other regions. First of all, let me appreciate Ms. Wasita Vijayanayaka and also SLYCAN Trust for organizing this timely important workshop and also giving this opportunity for me to share the Sri Lankan experience on integrating risk management and risk transfer into national policy making. Excuse me. Ministry of Environment in Sri Lanka is the national focal point to the UNFCCC. The Climate Change Secretariat of the Ministry of Environment is the operational focal point to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Being the national focal point and also the operational focal point, it is mandated to prepare the policies related to climate change. So, having utilizing that mandate, we have already prepared and implementing our national climate change policy of Sri Lanka since 2012. In our national climate change policy, there are 4. The one is vulnerability. As we know that, as we all know that Sri Lanka is one of the more global risk index published by the German Watch as per 2020. So we assist in that vulnerability of the country. So vulnerability has been vulnerable assessment has been highlighted in our national climate. What I was referring that the vulnerability is one of the major component in our national climate change policy, because in order to identify the risk, so vulnerable assessment to be conducted. The other area in order to build resilience to meet the adverse impact of climate change or reduce the risk of climate change. So we have to identify the potential adaptation measures. So adaptation is one of the area in our national climate change policy which is covered climate risk management. Other areas related to GHG emission reduction, mitigation, and also sustainable consumption and production is another area, and also the knowledge management. I am not going into details of those things, but I want to highlight here that in Sri Lanka, in our national climate change policy, we have already identified that integrating or incorporating climate risk management. So, however, what we have already identified that in our policy there is a gap on risk transfer. So, this risk transfer in 2012 in our policy, it has not been recognized and highlighted. However, we have already started updating our national climate change policy. This year we will start that process with stakeholder consultation. So in that process, we hope to incorporate risk management into our policy. However, I want to highlight here that this risk management is incorporated in disaster management policy as well as disaster management strategy and also disaster management act. So therefore it is covered, but the disaster management policies or strategies or act cover the whole spectrum of disasters. Some climate-induced disasters also covered, but you know that due to sea level rise and also other climate change adverse impact, it is not covered. So those things we have to incorporate into our policies and acts while they are updating. And also, I want to highlight here that Sri Lanka has prepared and is being implemented the National Adaptation Plan from 2016. In this National Adaptation Plan also, risk management or adaptation or reducing risk has been addressed in some sectors, especially agriculture and also human settlement. So in National Adaptation Plan, risk transfer has been identified. So therefore, though it is not in our national climate, the large scale, but in in small scale, micro level scale, it has been identified that risk transfer. But climate risk management has been incorporated into the national adaptation plan of climate change impacts. Further, I want to highlight here that we have submitted our nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. So in our national determined contributions, there are 4 major areas. One is adaptation, the other one is mitigation, the other area is means of implementation, the last area is loss and damage. In our loss and damage NDCs, so it has very clearly identified that risk management, climate risk management and climate risk transfer should be included. So in our loss and damage NDCs, the mainly focus that strengthening existing loss and damage mechanisms to meet the standard developed under the WASHO International Mechanism on Loss. Is coming under the WASHO International Mechanism on Loss and Damage will be incorporated to our existing or the local or domestic loss and damage mechanisms. So they are, in fact, in Sri Lanka, already we have risk transfer mechanisms such as crop insurance, such as property insurance, vehicle insurance for for damages, but it not covered as we expect from also international mechanisms such as non-economic losses and damage, environment value losses and damages, and cultural values. Those things not covered. So there's a gap. So that gap, in fact, we have identified. So so these are some of initiatives we have incorporated in our national climate change policies, strategies, action plans, and also the national commitment under the Paris Agreement. So there we have already incorporated climate risk management very well, but there is some gaps related to risk transfer. I think that risk management and risk transfer should be included to climate change policies, action when impacts are increasing. So what is unable to manage should have to be transferred. So therefore, in our policies, actions, and our strategies, the climate risk management and risk transfer should be integrated. So therefore, this event or this workshop will provide a very good platform for us to share the different countries' experience, perspectives, and also the lesson learned in order to incorporate, integrate climate risk in or climate risk transfer into our national policy making. So therefore, this event, I recognize that this is a very much valuable event, and this is a very important, this is very timely. So I take this opportunity as a government officer of Sri Lanka to appreciate Ms. Wasita Wijanayake and her team, SLYCAN Trust, for organizing this timely important as well as highly vital event, especially considering climate risk management and risk transfer in terms of incorporating to climate change related policies as well as disaster related policies, strategies, and action plans. I thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayatunga. And for those who joined us for the past 2 days as well, you would have known that Dr. Jayatunga and the Ministry of Environment have been with us with their support and have been giving us their time. So thank you very much for being a part of this. There's a slight change to the agenda. Dr. Ranjit Punyavardhana, who was supposed to join us yesterday and today, has been taken unwell suddenly, and he will not be a part of this session. And moving forward, just a few things. I would kindly request the speakers who will be speaking from now on to keep your presentations or interventions to about 8 minutes. So we also have some time for discussions following this, and we also have time for group work. Moreover, I have dropped the link to the registration form once again on the chat to those who just joined us. And it would also be great if you could rename yourself on Zoom to indicate your name and the country you're joining us from, so that we have an understanding of where you're from and could place you in the respective breakout group. So thank you very much again, Dr. Jayatunga and the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka for being a part of this event and for sharing your thoughts. I would now like to move on to our second presentation by Ms. Sarah Jain Ahmed. She is the financial advisor for B20. Ms. Ahmed.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, can see you and see your screen and can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this session. So I'm a V20 finance advisor in the CVF V20 Secretariat hosted in the Global Center on Adaptation. And I'll start off by introducing the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20. So the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the CVF, is the international forum for countries most threatened by climate change. The CVF was founded in 2009 by former President Nasheed from the Maldives, along with 11 other developing countries. The CVF created its sister initiative called the Vulnerable Group of 20 Ministers of Finance, the V20, in 2015, just 2 months before the Paris Agreement, in order to translate the political agenda into real economy outcomes. So the V20 agenda is quite straightforward: catalyze economic transformation among member states by enabling effective access to climate finance and mobilize a far stronger response from the economic and finance community to scale up investments for climate action in V20 economies. The V20 represents 48 vulnerable developing economies in Asia and the Pacific, Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, representing 1.2 billion people, including Sri Lanka. In 2020, Bangladesh assumed the presidency. The chair of the CVF is Her Excellency, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and the chair of the V20 is the Honorable Finance Minister of Bangladesh. So the financial protection agenda is important to the V20, as the protection gap is over 90%. And this is reflected in the G20 V20 InsuResilience Global Partnership, which aims to strengthen the resilience of developing countries and protect the lives and livelihoods of poor and vulnerable people against the impacts of disasters and other climate risks. This slide just illustrates the Vision 2025, which are targets to be achieved collectively by the partnership by 2025, including financial protection for 500 million poor and vulnerable people. The InsuResilience Global Partnership, the IGP, is a multi-stakeholder partnership, so it includes members from the G20, the V20, civil society, private sector, and implementing agencies. IGP is co-chaired by the Marshall Islands on the V20 side and Germany on the G20 side. And the V20 high-level consultative group members, in addition to the Marshall Islands, include Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Fiji, Madagascar, and the Philippines. So with the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, MCII, we checked on the NDCs of the 48 CVF V20 member states and found that 17 of the NDCs refer to micro-level insurance, 5 mention one other instrument to conventional insurance, such as social safety net or global disaster relief facilities. 2 of them do not explicitly mention insurance. However, they do refer to refining budgets to mobilize resources for disaster risk management. One member in particular gives an account of a broad set of climate disaster risk financing and insurance instruments, such as emergency funds, sovereign insurance, contingent credit, and catastrophe funds. We will update this note in the coming weeks to include information from 4 CVF countries that have now included climate disaster risk financing and insurance in their updated NDCs. Now, a lot of international development support rely on neatness of logic, but when they're so far away from what's happening on the ground, it does get difficult for these programs or solutions to effectively reach places and people that need the support. So it's important that actors in developing countries are part of the solutions building process. So when integrating climate and disaster risk transfer into national policies and climate commitments, it's key for the strategy to take into account the context of insurance and broader risk transfer. So usually insurance markets are linked with capital markets, but in reality, it does depend on the context of the country's public policy, such as building household resilience, supporting business resilience and enterprise development and capital market development. My next slide will focus primarily on the supporting business resilient and enterprise development side as an entry point. And so the V20 has a finance mobilization initiative called the Sustainable Insurance Facility. And as the name suggests, the facility focuses on insurance. More specifically, it focuses on enhancing financial protection for climate risks for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So in V20 economies, MSMEs contribute to between 20 and 70% of GDP. They constitute more than 80% of all businesses, and they make up 40 to 90% of employment. And they also contribute to export revenues. So they are important drivers of socioeconomic growth. But at the same time, MSMEs are often particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events and some suffer from high electricity costs if they're located in isolated or island areas to the detriment of their productivity and growth. Adequate insurance offerings to protect MSMEs and de-risk investments is quite low in terms of availability. So far, there are very few projects that focus on climate smart insurance for MSMEs, and even less so on enhancing the risk management capacities of MSMEs in the process. So in 2017, the V20, during an Asia Pacific regional consultation in the Asian Development Bank, articulated the request to develop the Sustainable Insurance Facility. And in 2018, partners such as the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative and UNEP Principles for Sustainable Insurance were identified by the V20 to assist with the further development. In 2019, the CIF had a kickoff event at the Climate Action Summit in New York with representatives from the Marshall Islands, Fiji, Bangladesh, along with partners such as Germany, ADB, and Global Parametrics. In 2020, implementation preparations began for the Philippines and Fiji. For the Philippines, the CIF will focus on working through cooperatives with support from the Asian Development Bank. And with that, I think I'll end my presentation as I think I'm running out of time. But thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahmed. And I think it's always great to have members and stakeholders from other groups to also join this and make the content much richer. Also, just letting everyone know, and for those joining us on Facebook, if you have any questions for the participants, for the speakers as we continue, please do drop them on the chat. For those on Facebook, drop them on the comments, and we will bring it forward to the discussion once all of the presentations are over. Furthermore, I would like to reiterate and ask everyone to kindly rename yourself on Zoom to indicate the country you're joining us from. There are a few Sri Lankans I can figure out on the group, but I mean, just to make sure that I put the people in the right group, please do rename yourselves to have your name and your country. And finally, please do fill out the registration form. We already have about 25 respondents so far, but we have 58 people on the call, so it would be great if everyone could fill that out as well. So thank you very much, Ms. Ahmed. Moving on to our next presentation, I would like to invite Mr. Prakash Vista. He's the technical expert on national adaptation plans, nature, climate change and energy team at UNDP. Mr. Vista.
Hello, Sensia Madam. I am speaking from Bangladesh. I am Mr. Habibur Rahman Talukdar. So I want to ask some question.
Mr. Rahman, sorry. Hello. Yeah, just a quick one. First, we will, please do stay on for the presentations. We do have a question answer session planned for after all of the speakers are over. So if you could maybe just hold on to your question until the speakers have completed their presentations, we can take your question then. Mr. Vista, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, my thanks to the SLYCAN Trust for inviting me today to participate in this webinar. And I'm happy to be amongst my learned colleagues here today. And it's very good to see you again, Dr. Jayatunga and Basita as well. I do have a lot to cover, so please forgive me if I go over my allotted 8 minutes time, or if I stray a little bit off topic. In the context of my work, I'm primarily involved in the integration of climate into national policies. So my talk today will be in two parts. I'll first touch upon UNDP's work in the area of NDC enhancement, the National Adaptation Plan, and green recovery, and how we're trying to align them in fostering a systematic and holistic integration of climate change adaptation into long-term strategies and policies. I will also talk about an EU-funded program on scaling up adaptation through the Africa Adaptation Initiative. And one of the main objectives of this program is to increase capacity of African experts on risk transfer mechanisms, which will be more in line with the discussions today. Incidentally, the program is also being launched next week at the Climate Adaptation Summit. I'll also briefly go over a related initiative from UNDP on insurance and risk financing facility. So last year, as you know, was marked with loss and disasters at unprecedented scale. More than 2 million deaths and trillions of dollars lost in GDP and revenue globally. And climate-related disasters haven't really stopped. So whatever the contribution to GHG emission reduction it may have had, what is for certain is that economies, when they come back, they will essentially roar, and with a vengeance, once the pandemic calms down. And many, unfortunately, will be at the cost of environment and climate. So as countries were programming some of their COVID-19 response to long-term recovery planning, most of which also include extensive economic stimulus, and at the same time, they were also updating their NDCs and entering into adaptation planning. It was a very critical juncture and provided a natural entry point for UNDP to engage in the green recovery and NDC and NAP linkages. It was even more relevant as we were providing support to developing countries towards their NDC enhancement as part of UNDP's climate promise work, while at the same time supporting mainstreaming of climate adaptation into national planning. So after at least half a year of engagement, what do some of these measures look like? On mitigation, some of the examples include boosting support to renewables and reducing fossil fuel subsidies, supporting residential and commercial building efficiency and retrofitting, identifying just transition activities, moving jobs away from fossil fuels into renewables, investing in public transport and electric vehicle infrastructure, and promoting reforestation. And on the adaptation side, they include investment in nature-based solutions as a means of providing jobs and income earning opportunities, providing credit lines and microfinance for smallholder farmers to enable them to adapt, and also investing in labor-intensive projects such as drainage and drinking water supply for urban areas. These are some of the examples. And with UNDP's COVID 2.0, which is looking at basically beyond just recovery and aligning it to the SDGs, to the world we want. We also cover 4 areas of offer. First is on social protection and social cohesion, which looks at uprooting inequalities by supporting cash transfers and financial inclusion, the future of work, social protection and fiscal stimuli, advancing universal health coverage, etc. Secondly, on green economy, looks into rebalancing nature, climate, and economy by boosting green and resilient recovery, exploring green recovery grants to protect nature based on jobs and livelihoods, promoting community-based solutions and green energy transition. Thirdly, on digital disruption, which is designed for speed and scale, by helping institutions and governments basically keep their doors open through remote working strategies, delivering critical services remotely, and enhancing digital financing options. And finally, on governance, in support of building a new social contract by supporting rule of law, breaking gender stereotypes, strengthening social capital, and maintaining conflict prevention. Of course, in addition to the green recovery, we are also supporting the NAP integration work in over 50 countries with GCF's readiness program on adaptation planning, and supporting many of the same with their NDC enhancement work under UNDP's climate promise. As you know, the national adaptation plans foster science-backed, risk-informed decision-making and policy planning. So these are some of the initiatives that help integrate climate risks into national planning processes and contribute to a shift in thinking, while at the same time contributing to climate resilient and risk-informed decision-making. At the same time, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that these alone, especially with the current landscape and trajectory, will not be sufficient to build resilient societies and environments of the future. And this is where our work on insurance and risk transfer also comes in. Now, before going into the Africa Adaptation Initiative project, I think it may be worthwhile to note, and it cannot be emphasized enough, that climate risk transfer should not be seen as a standalone area of work, but rather as an adaptation response as well, or at the very least complementary to climate adaptation. The reason I say this is, as it has been the experience in the past on climate change being siloed, and within the purview of the ministries of environment alone, risk transfer, what we see has been seen as the work of ministries of finance and economy. It may help if we think of risk insurance and transfer as a tool for adapting to climate change. So with that in mind, last year, the European Union responded to a call from the Africa group of negotiators and the African leaders on a process that dates back to 2015 and the Paris COP to help scale up adaptation action in Africa through its Africa Adaptation Initiative. The initiative is championed by the President of Gabon and has the blessings of from the African Union member states, as well as the environment ministers of all 54 African countries. So this project, which is implemented by UNDP, aims to achieve transformative adaptation results for African countries through the decade of climate action. And it is anchored in increasing access to climate finance and strengthening capacities of African countries on climate risk information and risk transfer mechanisms. In essence, what this project aims to achieve is to be a catalyst in helping achieve that goal of accelerating action and mobilizing resources for adaptation in the continent, and to drum up support for tangible action. One of the key components of the project is to enhance information and knowledge base and identify options for climate risk transfer mechanisms for future development and uptake by the countries. We work with many partners in this initiative, and I'm happy to also note my colleague Sarah, who is also from GCA. GCA is a major part of this initiative as well. And in particularly on this specific outcome on identifying options for risk transfer, the African risk transfer, the African risk capacity, which is a specialized agency of the African Union, is a key partner. The ARC, as it's known, started its operation in 2014 with 8 countries that participated in insurance pool to secure drought coverage for their agricultural seasons. In short, how it works was that capital investment was provided, in this case from the African Development Bank, the European Union, and other donors as seed funding. And the fund started operating with insurance premium payments from participating countries. Today it has over, I think, 34 member states, and payouts are made for agricultural seasons each year based on the risk pools. And the ARC has also started its extreme climate facility, which may be of interest, which aims at development of a sub-regional pooled parametric bond insurance mechanism based on establishment of multi-hazard index. And in a nutshell, what it does is it's starting to provide a new financial mechanism designed to access private capital that will secure access for African governments to finance climate adaptation. The XCF is planned to be structured to issue more than $1 billion in African climate change bonds over the next 30 years. And its financial obligations to African countries will be secured and issued as a series of climate change catastrophe bonds. These are examples specific to agricultural insurance and risk transfer. And there are also some sovereign risk pooling and transfer, which would ensure credit worthiness, for example, of a country, despite climate risks and adverse economic impacts, so they can continue to participate in the global economy. And finally, this brings me to UNDP's insurance and risk financing facility, which aims to make insurance and risk financing central to development. It's a cooperation between insurance industry and development sector, which will be at the heart of this initiative, and it'll be focused on inclusive insurance and risk financing. It is a tripartite agreement between Insurance Development Forum, the German government, and UNDP. And the insurance and risk financing facility will set out a comprehensive plan for 20 countries by 2025. And focusing on insurance and collaboration with the private sector in risk financing. Some of the activities will include inclusive insurance that will target vulnerability of all types and build on community action and work by mutual actors and private sector microinsurance providers. Sovereign risk, which is another area, will open up conversations between government and private sector and explore options for financing risks, while insurance industry expertise in modeling those risks will be integrated within wider financial planning and management. These are the tools in our arsenal, and I believe to tackle this the biggest challenge that humanity has faced, we do need to be fully armed and ready. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vista, and thank you to all of the speakers who've spoken so far. Just want that everyone know who's joining us. If you do have questions for the speakers, kindly do drop them on the chat or hold on to them until we're done with all of the presentations. We will be opening up around some time for question and answers as well as sharing of experiences. And also, I'm just back with my usual housekeeping. Please do rename yourself on Zoom to indicate your name and country, and also do fill out the registration form that we have linked on the chat. I will drop it shortly after this. So thank you once again, Mr. Vista. Moving on, I would now like to pass the screen to Dr. Kamarul Azari Razak. He's the Director, Disaster Preparedness and Prevention Center, Malaysia Japan International Institute of Technology at the University of Technology, Malaysia, which I believe I pronounced correctly. Dr. Razak, you're muted currently.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, perfect. So thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitations. Well done to the organizer. I think it's very timely to discuss the subject matters. And my name is Kamarul Azari Razak from University of Technology Malaysia, based in Kuala Lumpur. Today, I would like to talk about climate-induced disaster risk from the development's planning point of view, some progress and challenges. So next. Well, I have about 8 minutes to go. Yeah, so there's 4 outlines from my side. I would like to give you some sort of overview of a disaster risk at the ASEAN level, then narrow down at the Malaysia side. And the second part, I would like to introduce some of the national initiative on making our cities more resilient based on some nationwide study. And the third one, I would like to promote this transdisciplinary approach for making our city more resilient in the context of promoting risk-informed sustainable developments and DRR investments. And I would like to end with 3 recommendations and 6 secret recipe, at least within these 8 minutes, hopefully. So next slides, please. Yeah, so to get a start, if you see on the left side, so that's basically based on data collected from 2012 until 2019 by AHA Center based in Jakarta. It indicates that most of the disaster in ASEAN is flooding, almost 57% on the left side. And if you see on the right side of the figure, and it shows some statements indicate that due to the constant risk of natural hazard, the region exposed capital stock up to 3 times of its combined economic. I think this is something interesting to discuss, to debate how much basically the DRR investment is needed and what would be the expectation in the future. So within the context of Malaysia, you see that Malaysia has a higher number of population exposed to flooding, something interesting to bring into the presentations today. Next. So I just want to flying back to Malaysia. So you see some of the urbanization rate, rainfall increment based on the future climate projection. Is a bit scary to see the amount of the urbanization rate and the projected rainfall increment in some state, some region. So based on the data collected, released by the National Disaster Management Agency, Prime Minister Department, indicate some of the figure on the right side. Well, more than 400% economic losses based on the data collected and released in October 2019. So, well, what does it mean? So all the investments, we have to consider the worst case scenarios, not only on the human losses, but also the economic losses. I think it's rather fit to the themes of the workshops today to look into some of the alternative mechanisms, including risk transfer perspective. That's also covered these critical infrastructure services up to 20%. So this is something challenging for the governments to make sure that all the infrastructures, all the economic developments in the future are resilient enough to tackle and cover these future climates. So next. I just want to bring you some perspective about these systemic risks, and hopefully today we can also discuss and explore some basic understanding of how we can explore best scenarios, best strategies to tackle this systemic or a new type of risk. And of course, I think this is very timely to reflect our strategies and review some of our commitments. Next. Yeah, so I promised to share about the national initiative. So last 2 years, we had one nationwide study carried out by Plan Malaysia, Federal Departments of Town and Country Planning. And it covers 12 major cities in Malaysia and also 6 different disaster types. And it's interesting, based on the climate resilience index, it shows that the 3 major component, economic, environment, and institutions, play a major role in making our cities more resilient. So based on these 125 indicators, so we use the advantages, the capacity of the cities to design some of the approach to tackle or at least absorb, reduce some of the future risks and also prevent some of the climatic risks. And on the left side, you see these national guidelines for development planning for making our city more resilient. I think for those who are interested to know more about that, we are happy to share the documents. And next, well, if you see that the economic, the finance and budget play a major role, and that's one of the things that I would like to bring into the sessions today. And coming back to the development planning process and hierarchies, as you can see on the left side, that's how the Malaysian governments inject or mainstream the disaster risk reduction strategies, initiative and project into this national physical plan, for example, at the national level, state structural plan, well, of course, at the state level, and we have also district and special area plan. So that's covered the development process, development planning, and we can also inject some of the disaster risk assessments module into the development control. That's something interesting to see how actually the major shift carried out by the Malaysian governments to mainstream some of the DRR strategies into the development planning at the different level of the skill. And I think it also shows the implementation agency. It's not only the governments, the public sectors, but also we transfer some of the responsibility to the private sectors like developers. So this is something interesting. It's not only one particular disaster at one particular area, but also it covers a multi-hazard scenarios. So this is something interesting to bring and discuss, explore more how we can at least practically implement it and see the impact in the future. Next. So yes, please, next. In the next slides, I would like to a little bit explore this new concept, a transdisciplinary approach. We have published one article together with a JICA expert attached to MGIT in the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction. So this TDA approach consists of several aspects and components. But the interesting part of how we promote this co-design, co-produce, co-deliver, and co-implement concept into the implementation, and of course address the scientific knowledge-based decision-making into the process. So this is something interesting to see the concept, and we practically implemented in some state, some region that vulnerable to disaster. You can have a look, a full article, full reports from the link given. And next, I think I come to the end of my talk. Three recommendations as promised. The first one on mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and resilience strategies. It's not easy, but I think it's worth to invest, and don't just forget about this concept. If you would like to implement and inject it, maybe involved with a different scale of development planning, control, and management. And I would like to share two secret recipe based on my experience and also observation at the different engagement with national sectors. The first one, I think, is worth to invest on this new approach, TDA, since the complexity of disaster, not only on the current risk, but also we are interested in the future risk. So I think it's worth to explore into the technological investments as well, from mapping, monitoring, modeling, forecasting, early warning. I think there are many ways of engaging new tools, new technological approach. The second recommendation goes to these DRR resilience concepts into this dynamic and multi-sectoral socio-economic developments. One of the keys, of course, to look into how we can invest into the local champion and to make sure that our strategy are easy to execute, implement, very rapid, and it has an impact. And the third recommendation, investing in risk-informed sustainable developments is involved with multi-stakeholders covering a public, private, academia, civil society. It's a shared responsibility. And I think it's worth to mention that the political leaders, the political will and their commitments also play a role in making the process faster. And my last slides, next slides. I would like to conclude by indicating the concept of risk-informed development and DRR investments in the context of national planning, national development planning. For example, it requires a lot of scientific knowledge, technology, and innovation. I think it's worth to mention that these risk-informed decision and future investments require a set of understanding how we can explore and utilize the science-based decision making. And on the last note, sustainable development cannot be achieved unless disaster risk is reduced. With that, I close my session. Thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Razak, for the presentation. And I'm sure those on the call will also have a lot of questions. And welcome to everyone who's joined us. If you have any questions, Dr. Razak, kindly do drop them on the chat. We will also open up the floor for Q&A a bit later. I would now like to invite Ms. Anota Senaviratna, the Director the Disaster Management Center of Sri Lanka. Ms. Senaviratna. Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, it is my great pleasure to be with you here and to share some idea, particularly focusing on the Sri Lankan context, on the integrated climate change and then the disaster risk reduction for its transferring into particularly to the national policy. So this is a very timely discussion. So now we are discussing a lot of disaster risk reduction measures in different contexts and in different scales. So when we consider the entire disaster risk management spectrum, so initially what we have to do is that we have to do some preventive measures. So with the preventive measures, we can reduce our risk into certain level. And after that, we have to go for the next step, that is disaster risk mitigation measures. So with the mitigation, whether it is a structural or non-structural, we can reduce our risk. So then the third option is the risk transferring. So after the risk transferring, our risk level need to be come to our tolerable level of the risk. So then the risk transferring, after that, the residual risk will be remain. And then with that risk, we have to live with some precautions or without precautions. So it's up to the communities, right? So with that, while focusing the risk transferring incorporated into the national policies, we have to consider a few key points. So when we consider the Sri Lankan context, based on our experience, most of our damage loss assessment damages are to the public sector, because public sector is maintaining and developing all the infrastructure. When the infrastructure get damaged, all these damages are incurred into the public sector account, but most of the losses are due to the private sector. So while doing this transferring mechanism, we have to consider the recovery of the damages as well as not to increase or to control the losses. So then with that, then we have to consider the national concept or the national capabilities on this financial situation, particularly during the disasters. Before considering all these things into the national policies and how to incorporate this risk transferring mechanism, whether it is a climate or a disaster or whatever it is, risk transferring mechanism to the national policies, what we have to think is our financial state and the resource base. So based on these things, we have to consider the first thing is that we have to consider that what is our reserve fund. So reserve fund, I mean, if something happened, what is the capabilities to use our available funds to respond or recover from these disasters. So we have to consider that. Then what is the level of the funds available for the contingencies at the government mechanism or the treasury. So we have to consider that part also. Then after that, we can go for the catastrophic bonds or the other risk financial tools and those type of mechanism. So even the risk financial other tools. So when we consider Sri Lankan context, we have a couple of experience on this risk transferring mechanism. So I would like to share that risk transferring mechanism we practices. So one I want to share is that, I mean, before the 1st April in 2020, we had that the government funded risk transferring mechanism, that is risk insurance mechanism for the country. So under that risk insurance mechanism, we covered death totally affected people or injured people, and then damaged houses up to 2.5 million Sri Lankan rupees, and then some medium and small entrepreneurs. So, but while implementing this transferring mechanism, we experience a lot of hindrance as well as disadvantages with this risk transferring mechanism, because it's a lump one. So we transfer our risk into another company, into reinsured in global insure market. So then with that we took some compensation, and then we distribute all these compensation for the affected people and the affected the owners of the affected property or the SMEs. So there we experience a lot of issues from the community, that from a damage assessment or the valuation of the damage assessed, and up to the getting the reinsurance also we experience a lot of disadvantages as a government. So there the reason for that was all these risk insured mechanism was based on the it's like a lump thing. So not that a spatially distributed risk. So we consider it as a lump risk. So then for a whole we paid something, and then if something happened, we got something. So there are a lot of mismatches and the disconnect in this process. So that in last April, we stopped that, and then all the damages and losses now covered under the treasury fund. So with that, we are going to give the compensation for the affected people and to recover their property. So that type of risk insurance mechanisms are not good for the financial situations of the government. So it is one experience I want to share with you all. So there I want to highlight that when we are having the risk transferring mechanism, the most important thing is that we need to know where the high risk, where the low risk, where the moderate risk, like that we should know. So based on that risk, we have to invest for the risk transferring things, and our premium and all these things need to be based on that mechanism, that spatial distribution of the risk. So if not, it will create some other issues among the communities as well as the governance issues as well. So then the other one is I want to highlight is in Sri Lanka we practice one index-based risk insurance for the agriculture sector and the livelihood. So they are also it actually went pretty well. So it is a pilot project. So with that pilot project also we faced some issues that we couldn't roll it out. We can't replicate it. So there also we experience some issues with the data and information. So when we are doing it in index-based way, so what we need is that we need some correct data, and those correct data, based on these correct data, we need to focus and forecast for the project, what will happen in future and all these things. So the projections or the forecasting need to be go to the general public or the farmers or the community. So the community need to have some understanding, and they need to know, they should have a know-how on how to interpret these projections and the things, and how they incorporated all these things. They are the issue was with the data and the know-how. So then apart from that, the private industry, so apart from the government insurance mechanism, we are having some private sector insurance companies also. So when we consider the private properties of the country, now in the country we are having that disaster insurance mechanism even with the private sector. So there are also again that issue is coming. So those insurance premiums are not based on the risk. So those premiums are based on the capabilities of the people. If I am having a lot of income, then I can have a big insurance. But if I am a poor one, then I can't have a sufficient appropriate insurance for my property. So those are some issues. So if the insurance schemes or they are the premiums decision system or some indicators for these things based on the information, risk information particularly, so then we can we can have a proper insurance schemes, and then we can get the commitment of the communities as well. So the personal insurance also, there are, I mean, it need to be a insurance, it need to be a, it not need to be an insurance market, right? It need to be into insurance industry. So then people need to come, I mean, the important thing is that within the community, we need to create a demand for the risk insurance. So still in Sri Lankan context, that demand for the risk insurance is not available. So people should know that we need to have insurance. If we are having insurance, we can recover this much of risk. So that discussion or that conversation is not available in Sri Lankan society. So these, I mean, some few example I'm sharing with you. So basically, insurance, the most important thing for the risk transferring or the insurance schemes, whether we are incorporating all these things into the government policies, these things need to be a practical one. So the government need to practice all these things with the community for the benefit of the community. So we have to focus all these things based on that. So one thing there are the requirements are, one is that we need to establish a risk-based premium schemes into our national policies. So then the other one is data and information. So at the same time, the upgrade or continuous periodically how we upgrade this data and information, we need to discuss in our national policies for these insurance things. Then the other most important one is the public property insurance. We don't have public property insurance like roads, like the schools. They are, I mean, highly damages these things during the disasters. But we are not discussing that, and we don't have any mechanism for these things. Then the community knowledge and community commitment for the risk. So now people think that everybody need to provide by the government. So as the government is a welfare government. So I mean, we are going to provide all these things, but merely providing the relief items for the people, we can't ensure the resilience. So insurance need to be, each and every individual should know that why need to have the insurance and all these things. Then the community knowledge we have to increase, and then we can transfer that risk into some financial instrument. So if we are not considering these things, we can't have we can't incorporate all these things into the national policies. So in Sri Lanka, with the Ministry of Finance, we are discussing with this risk transferring mechanism. But when we consider the Sri Lankan context, we have to consider that with the local government, when we are doing the taxes for our home, our houses, or our properties, when we are paying the taxes, then we can add some sort of a premium based on the risk. So then that type of insurance schemes or the financial mechanism, we need to incorporate it from the local government level to the national level. So in the insurance, strategies and policies need to be go for from top to bottom, and the mechanism need to be started from bottom to bottom up approach, following the policies and the regulations or the rules available in the country. So these are the few points I want to share with you. And when we are focusing all these things, I want to actually, as the professional work in this disaster management center, I want to get all your idea, I mean, the different diverse group in here as participants. So all your ideas and the things we need to incorporate it in this national policy, so that I request that SLYCAN Trust sharing all this information and the inputs from the even from the other countries participants also, to develop to incorporate our risk transferring mechanism into our national policies or the financial policies as well. So with that, I would like to thank you and congratulate SLYCAN Trust and the participants to have this fruitful workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Senuratna, and for those who have been joining us for the past few days. Ms. Senuratna is also with us yesterday to share her input, and I think what she said now is very timely for the discussion. Unfortunately, Ms. Senuratna has to leave because she has another prior commitment, but I think what she said is something we can take forward during the sessions. So thank you once again to Ms. Senuratna as well as the Disaster Management Center Sri Lanka for taking part and also being a part of these conversations, which are, as you rightfully said, timely and very necessary. So thank you once again. And
Sensia Madam, I am Mr. Habibur Talukdar. I am speaking from Bangladesh. I want to some
Mr.
question
Rahman,
for.
Mr. Rahman, sorry,
Yes.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. We have two more presentations. So we have Ms. Linda Siegel and we also have Mr. Kairos de la Cruz. So once the presentations are over, I would kindly request you to maybe present your question and then we can take the conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Now, okay.
Over.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, Ms. Siegel, once again, and thank you for joining us. Ms. Siegel is a PhD candidate at the University College of London Faculty of Laws, and I would now request her to make her presentation. Shalini or Ashan, if you could share, Nipon sharing, right? Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. In addition to doing PhD research on climate change here in London, I wonder if you could put the slideshow on for me. That would be great. In any case, these are my slides. I'm going to speak very specifically about the example of SIDS and looking at trying to tie the international process to national level policy and other initiatives through looking primarily at NDCs, which we heard the colleague from Undp talk about, and also Dr. Yaya Tunga in respect of Sri Lanka, and also at national adaptation plans and how they connect to the international policy environment as well as the national policy environment. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Ms. Siegel, I think we have a small lag in the connection. So
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think I will maybe share the screen from this end. Nipun, you can stop your screen share, just share it from this end. It might be better.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So I'm really looking at loss and damage, and that also picks up from what Ms. Sinaratne's previous intervention, where she really was talking about risk transfer mechanisms to deal with losses and damages associated with disasters. So I will be focusing on loss and damage in NDCs and NAPs in the international process. So just to give you a brief recap of what an NDC should have and could have, the NDC must include a mitigation contribution, but parties acknowledged at COP24 in 2018 that the NDC could include other components, including an adaptation communication. The guidance in relation to the adaptation communication provides as a possible element to this communication impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities. And I believe that this is one of the ways of introducing risk transfer elements into the NDC. Many particularly vulnerable countries, including LDCs and SIDS, have included loss and damage in their NDCs. And this is a statistic that I picked up from Monday's workshop event that specifically looked at loss and damage in NDCs. Under the Paris Agreement's Enhanced Transparency Framework, the ETF, parties must report on progress in implementing their NDCs every 2 years. And by including loss and damage in the NDC itself, it will enter the Paris Agreement reporting and assessment process, both through the Enhanced Transparency Framework and then every 5 years through the collective global stocktake. It's important to note that the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the ETF include voluntary reporting of information on loss and damage, which takes into account projected changes in climate-related risks. So this is another sort of entry point for looking at climate climate risk and loss and damage associated with those risks. And the GST, the global stocktake process, may also take loss and damage into account. And the Warsaw International Mechanisms Executive Committee has an obligation to report on its activities under the GST as well. So a number of entry points for where loss and damage fits into the process from a bottom-up sort of policy level, national level approach. Next slide, please. So there are potentially other vehicles for reporting on loss and damage in the international process. The decision that established the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage acknowledges that loss and damage may exceed the limits of our ability to adapt. And some people call this a residual risk in risk parlance. And this notion that there are limits to adaptation, whether because of a lack of capacity or due to a current technological constraint or constraints, has been acknowledged in the latest scientific reports coming out of the IPCC, including the Fifth Assessment Report and a more recent special report on the impacts of climate change at 1.5 degrees centigrade increase in global average temperature. The concept of loss and damage as being what exceeds a country's ability to adapt has facilitated the inclusion of loss and damage in countries' national adaptation plans. And I will be giving you some examples of that very shortly. And it should be noted that national adaptation plans, NAPs, are also a vehicle for submitting an adaptation communication, and the Paris Agreement explicitly lists countries' adaptation communications as a component of the global stocktake. So this is another entry point for looking at the risks, climate risks, and potential loss and damage associated with those risks. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to go into some examples, and I'm focusing on the case of SIDS. I have, as a legal advisor for the Alliance of Small Island States, supported SIDS in the UNFCCC process for over 15 years. So this certainly is an area of speciality for me, and the organizers asked me to focus on SIDS and provide some concrete examples around loss and damage in NDCs and NAPs. So I've just picked out a few. It's a survey. There's certainly other SIDS NDCs that contain notions around loss and damage, but I wanted to pick out these ones in particular because they really focused on a comprehensive risk management approach. The Antigua and Barbuda NDC looks at, has targets for building, improving buildings and infrastructure, and for establishing affordable insurance schemes by a certain date, and also acknowledges that there are limits to adaptation, and looks at and considers the impacts of climate change on various different sectors. The Dominican Republic recently updated their NDC and submitted in December an NDC that includes a special section on loss and damage. And this is very comprehensive and sets out a series of activities that the Dominican Republic will undertake to address loss and damage, including looking at climate scenarios that are prepared by a regional water center in the region in Panama, based in Panama, working with the World Bank to estimate economic losses associated with natural disasters, and that's included in their NDC, establishing a data collection, a damage data collection and assessment system, strengthening risk management governance through legislation, and establishing an emergency fund to cover future loss and damage. So a very comprehensive program by the Dominican Republic and their NDC. Moving to the Pacific, we can look at Fiji, which acknowledges that regardless of whether we stay below 1.5, there will be a multitude of interrelated climate risks that will affect Fiji. and they have a series of proposals for building resilience to these potential losses, including risk-informed land use planning and housing policies, developing resilient infrastructure, engaging in climate smart agriculture and fisheries management, and other proposed activities. Next slide, please. Just two more examples, one from the Maldives. And the Maldives in their updated NDC plan to enhance mechanisms for collection of information on loss and damage, which I believe is a real starting point, because they intend to strengthen existing climate risk insurance mechanisms to build resilience. And we heard from the last speaker that data and the accuracy of data is really critical to having effective risk insurance or risk transfer mechanisms being put into place. The Maldives also will look to facilitate this expansion of these mechanisms across the public and private sectors, and mainstreaming risk notions into coastal development policies and strengthening early warning systems. And finally, and I won't go into too much detail on PNG, but they have monetized the losses due to climate impacts over the last nearly 10 years. And that's in the range of $23 million US. And they've launched the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework and identified some key priority areas for adaptation. Next slide, please. So it's just a very brief survey of some of the different approaches that SIDS have taken to look at loss and damage in their NDCs. And I just want to look very briefly at two small island developing states that have included notions around loss and damage in their national adaptation plans. The first one is Grenada, and Grenada is actively looking to build coherence between its NDC and NAP. So not just picking one instrument over the other, but trying to work across both of these important policy instruments that feed into the international process. And here, just a few activities that they're working on right now in order to reduce risk and the types of investments that they are active in reducing risk. And St. Lucia actually, in their national adaptation plan, has a chapter entitled Limits to Adaptation. And this chapter considers the limits to adaptation across a number of categories. It identifies potential loss and damage in priority sectors and sets out potential comprehensive risk management approaches across the full spectrum of climate change risk management, assessment, reduction, transfer, and risk retention. Next slide, please. I want to finish off with an example from the Pacific, fairly recent, at least the first one, is the Framework for Resilient Development in the Pacific, the FRDP, which was agreed in 2017 and goes through 2030. It's a set of voluntary guidelines for this Pacific Islands region to provide an integrated approach to address climate change and disaster risk management. It has several goals, including strengthening the integration of adaptation and risk reduction, and strengthening disaster preparedness. It's an all stakeholder approach, so it's not purely a government initiative. And it links the global frameworks, including the Paris Agreement, the 2030 Agenda, and the Sendai Framework. Another policy tool that has been in effect or being used in the Pacific for a number of years, at least 10, are Joint National Action Plans, or JNAPs as they're called in the Pacific. This is a regionally developed tool for integrating climate change and disaster risk management, and a number of countries in the Pacific have developed JNAPs, and one or two countries are already on their second JNAP. So it's a tool that's being used actively in the Pacific region. Next slide, please, and this is my last. Just to conclude and to summarize, I suppose, is a better word. NDCs may include loss and damage, and many already do. National adaptation plans are another vehicle for including loss and damage in the Paris Agreement process, in particular in a section on impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities. The Enhanced Transparency Framework provides for voluntary reporting of information on loss and damage, taking into account climate-related risks. And there have been efforts related to loss and damage that may be included in the global stock taking process, although the ETF and the GST are not yet up and running. SIDS have included loss and damage in their NDCs and NAPs, and particularly in the context of risk-based parameters. And finally, the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage has an obligation to report on its activities under the GST. So this is an attempt to show how national level policy documents that are germane to the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC process connect the national level policy to international climate change work. That is it for me. Thank you very much. And thanks again to SLYCAN Trust for inviting me to present today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seeger. And before we move on to our last presentation, I would like to remind everyone once again, we have quite a number of people on the call, so thank you for joining, first of all, and kindly do fill out the registration form for the day. I have linked it on the chat. It's a Google form that opens up. Please do, if you haven't already, please do fill that out. And I will kindly request once more to rename yourself on Zoom to indicate your name and your country, so it would help us better prepare for the breakout groups. Now we would move on to our final presentation for the day before we open up for Q&A. I would like to invite Mr. Kairos de la Cruz, the Deputy Executive Director at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities in the Philippines. Kairos, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone from the Philippines. I won't take long. I'll just share my screen first. To you, I'm Kairos de la Cruz. I work for the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, or ICSC. ICSC is an international climate and energy policy group based in the Philippines, and what we do basically is advancing climate resilient and low carbon development through a variety of work areas that we do. We work subnationally with local communities, but we also engage in the international arena through CVF B20 and through the climate negotiations, of course. What I will share in the next few minutes is very practical, and I would like to thank all of the speakers who presented before me for providing the overarching context that is much needed, and I think those contexts would also allow me to dive in deeper, specifically to what we have in the Philippines. So the Philippines, I think, just like most vulnerable countries, has been allocating internally budgets for climate action. And CDRF has a crucial role to play in filling in the gaps in existing plans and existing projects by both national government and subnational entities such as local government units. And it do so by adding safety nets that would ensure project success and lesser opportunity costs, particularly for subnational actors. And this generalization came about from two main things. First is the research that we're doing on weather index insurance via the general context of agriculture insurance and the People's Survival Fund. The People's Survival Fund, or the PSF, it's our nationally legislated adaptation fund in the Philippines. It's a direct access fund specifically made for local government units and communities to access to provide long-term financial streams for climate action, in particular climate change adaptation projects. But first, let me go on some of our conclusions in the research that we did. First, there's much need to build more demand for agri-insurance, particularly for weather index-based insurance and other parametric insurance instruments. And this can only be done by providing more platforms for discussions across different sectors of society, from higher educational institutions to non-government organizations to private sector, and of course with the government. Because then, information, products, and services can only be better if such a platform is present. Together with SLYCAN Trust, ICSC is also working on the multi-actor partnership project, and we're quite interested in this because this platform that's necessary for more stakeholder level engagements is becoming, more tangible and more real for us. As the time goes on into the project implementation. There is a need to improve the local data collection and analysis by sort of utilizing what is already there and innovating more on how we can get more data, more climate data in particular. In the Philippines, I don't know if you've been to the Philippines, we have more or less 7,000 islands, and we do have a wide variety of climates, microclimates across the country. Our eastern seaboard is particularly vulnerable to both extreme weather events and slow onset events such as sea level rise. But no one has the overall picture. And data collection could be expensive. I know it's a fact for most of us. But we're seeing innovations on the ground on how communities can be more engaged in data collection. And I think some of the success stories on parametric insurance and even insurance in general are done in areas where communities has a lot of stake, has a lot of contributions in the gathering of climate data and information. And the last point on that research is that institutional support, particularly on the policy side of things, would be much needed, at least for the Philippines. But I think this is also true for most countries. We need to level the playing field for more insurance actors to come in and provide more responsive instruments as well. In the Philippines, one of our longest standing insurance companies is government run. And one of the challenges so far, particularly raised by the private sector, is that subsidies and tax breaks are needed to ensure that they can operate with premiums that are affordable, and they can operate toe-to-toe with state-run insurance companies as well. And on my second point, on the second case that I would like to present to you, as I've said, it's called the People's Survival Fund. It's our national adaptation fund in the Philippines. It has a small seed fund of roughly $25 million every year, and it's a floor. It's a floor budget because back then our Congress and Senate realized that our adaptation need would be definitely much higher than $25 million. But they have to put in figures, so they put in a floor so that they can increase that budget as they see fit and as demand increases in the years of implementation. The PSF, in its growing list of projects or fundable projects, risk transfer mechanisms is one of those that are usually singled out in terms of importance. Nonetheless, applicants to the fund shy away from it because of the main reason that it's not a hard project. It's not infrastructure. It's not something that you can present to your constituencies. It's almost as if that it's not something real. It will take a calamity to access that insurance instrument, for example, and they try to play on, they gamble on that chance. So they usually shy away from risk transfer mechanisms in insurance. However, the fund has been aggressive in showing that RTM has a lot of potentials in actually building a better case for a proposal to be approved if it can be integrated in the overall design, because it lessens the unpredictability of the project. It lessens the chances that the project will fail due to unforeseen circumstances. It will provide stopgap measures for communities just in case something happened before the project is actually completed, and so on. And ultimately, I think the message that I want to leave with you all is that CDRF risk transfer mechanisms, at least for project design and planning and budgeting, it does not take away funds, from really important stuff. It does not lessen the budget for more climate smart agriculture, for better buildings, and so on. It actually enhances the overall design of the project. It actually multiplies the benefits that the constituencies that people can get from a project once it's implemented. And I know that we still have a breakout group, so I will end with that. Again, salamat. It's thank you in Filipino. And just in case you have questions, you can reach to me. You can reach me through my email, kairos@icc.ngo. So thank you, and good evening again.
Thanks, Kairos. And that brings an end to all the presentations. I know some of you all have questions, but before we go into questions, I think we might take a break and do something fun. So first of all, we will do what we've been doing for the past few days. For those of you who are here and who are comfortable enough to turn on your videos, if you could turn them on, we could maybe quickly take a picture, and everyone could sport their best smiles for the day. Right, so just hold on to that smile until everyone turns on their cameras. Just a few more people. Is there anyone else who'd like to turn on their cameras? Okay, so yes, that's all we're getting. All right, so everyone maybe keep smiling and keep screenshotting. So we have a page 2 as well. Please don't forget if you're taking a screenshot. All right. Took some more, and right. We took a few, and thank you very much for. Sorry. Thank you very much. It would be really great if you could keep your mics muted. Right. So now we're actually going to quickly. Sorry. We are just quickly going to break into a Mentimeter. And while this is going on, I think you could also type out any questions that you have for the speakers. So I'm just going to present this, and I'm just also going to drop it on the chat. But if you could log on to menti.com and use the code 7629921. I will also drop the same on the chat. So log on to menti.com, and okay, I hope you could see my screen. So we have participants from UK, Pakistan. I'm joining from Sri Lanka, though I haven't really written that in here. Okay, and the Philippines. We also had some others from Switzerland. We did have some participants from the Fiji and some countries in the African continent as well, Trinidad and Tobago. We also had a participant from Nepal, some from Egypt on the chat. Okay, thank you very much. And also, this is just to get an understanding of what and which organization you're joining us from. So with your CSO, government organization, private organization, academia, or other. So lots of others. And Also, just a few things to do simultaneously. Please do fill out the registration form if you haven't already. After this is done, I will drop a link to it on the chat. And furthermore, if you have any questions for the speakers, do put it on the chat as well, and we could take it forward. All right, thank you very much. And we'll close the Menti for now. So thank you for taking part. Now we open up the floor for questions. I think we could have the questions on for about, well, depending on the number of questions we have, but maybe about at least 10 to 15 minutes. So if you have any questions for the speakers, some of them had to unfortunately leave, such as Dr. Jayatunga and Ms. Untitled due to prior commitments. But until that, I actually had a question for, I actually had a question for any of the panelists who would like to take this. So this is combining two things that Ms. Untitled and Kairos said. It was what Kairos said on community participation, and what also Ms. Untitled said about the need to increase awareness on, for individuals on why they need to have insurance. So I think this has also been seen as a gap in some of the work that we do. So how do we address that gap, and where do we start? Are there any best practices that you could bring to the table? It's open to any of the panelists who would want to maybe take that. Thank you. Kairos, sorry to maybe put you on the spot, but I think it was something that you also spoke of.
Yeah, I mean, at least on what we got so far, and specifically referring back to the presentation that I made on the People's Survival Fund here in the Philippines. I mean, what we try to do is to provide, a step-by-step guide to most local government units who are trying to access the fund on how to ensure that the communities are asked on what they think about their adaptation needs are, and they can validate themselves whether that's really, the most important thing that they should ask for the fund to finance at that particular moment. But ultimately, I think for most of the approved proposals that we have on the fund, and ICSC has the pleasure of serving as the NGO representative to the People's Survival Fund Board for the past few years, the most successful proposals are those who have spent a lot of time and some resources on making sure that the voices from the communities are reflected in their proposals. And that includes, at some extent, particular requests from farming organizations, from cooperatives, for example, to make sure that insurance risk transfer mechanisms are included in the proposals that the local government unit would submit, for example. And there are some cases where in risk transfer mechanisms is actually the counterpart funding that's brought forward by a proponent, which is actually good in a way because they're quite confident that they can finance that part of their adaptation plan, but they would just ask, the remaining from the People's Survival Fund for that case. And I think, with the multi-actor partnership project that we are doing, as I've mentioned, one of the things that's really beautiful about it is that voices who are not necessarily, loud enough on a usual day are being amplified and listened to, and hopefully it will, result to more responsive instruments, may it be in the form of insurance or something else in the near future.
Thank you, Kairos. Is there anything else that the other speakers would like to add to this? And also, I would like to check in if Mr. Rahman is on the call from Bangladesh. If so, you could ask your question after this. Mr. Bista, would you like to add anything?
Yes, it's not so much of a response rather than something that we've also noticed within the context of the Africa Adaptation Initiative when we are doing our initial assessments is that indeed there is a lack of awareness when it comes to risk transfer and insurance, and not only necessarily at the community level, but even at the national level. Looking at the countries in Africa, is that even when it comes to, for example, public property, there's very little insurance participation, and so a part of the work that we're proposing, at least with the insurance and risk financing facility, is an advocacy drive in order to basically strengthen this this capacity, and also for people to really understand that you know, if some of the risk is transferred, perhaps your cost on adaptation will also go down. So you know, this is some initial thoughts that we are also having as part of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bista. We have a question from Varuni on the chat, and I think any speakers who are willing to take this can do so. As developing countries recover from economic impacts of COVID-19, what strategies can we look at in order to lessen the burden of the governments bearing the costs of climate-induced disasters in the risk transferring process? I would like to maybe combine this with a question that I received separately from Anas. He's also asked what steps has the government taken to fill the gap of insurance and compensation during COVID-19? We don't, in Sri Lanka, as far as I know, I'm not sure if we have any government representatives with us, but if there are from Sri Lanka or any other country and who would like to respond to this question, kindly do so. So that's two questions, one from Varuni and the second one from Anas. Sorry, Kairos, to put you on the spot again, but at the previous workshop that we had, you did mention of COVID-19 recovery or like a relief fund that you'll have for migrants in the Philippines as well. So I suppose this would also be an example, like an insurance scheme that was there. So I suppose this would be an example that you could bring to the table until other participants get ready.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite sure that there are more, you know, comprehensive policies around. For example, maybe the V20 can share as well on the climate prosperity plans. Yeah, but particularly on COVID-19, if I remember it right, what I shared was that, for example, here in the Philippines, you know, I mean, for a while, there are some private sector insurance companies who tried offering something like a COVID-19 insurance, but it's a very limited form of insurance. It's not that comprehensive as well. So I'm not even sure whether that has been continued. But so far, what we have that's government-led is it's called a social amelioration program, wherein people receive a small amount of money to sort of offset the losses that they incurred due to COVID-19, particularly in terms of income flows and employment. There are a lot of criticisms around the program, but a lot of people were also thankful about it because, you know, at least it helped a bit in its own little way, I think, their plight on, I mean, given that COVID-19 is impacting us in very extreme ways. I also mentioned in that workshop that the private sector insurance companies, the big players also recorded, are quite surprised that it's, you know, Filipinos in general didn't apply for insurance coverage, didn't apply for claims during this time. It only means, you know, that people are not covered as much as they should be, or that those who are covered are already, you know, economically liquid enough to cope up with the changing times. So in any case, it's the poor and the most vulnerable that are left to fend for themselves. So.
Thanks very much, Kairos. Ms. Ahmed, from a speaker from the B20, I'm wondering if you could maybe add to that as well.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Kairos, for putting me on the spot. Yeah, so the climate prosperity plans that Kairos was referring to is the enabling of building back better in highly vulnerable regions. So there's strategic investment frameworks coming from the CVF and the V20. Bangladesh being the presidency, and during the UN General Assembly, the Prime Minister also stated that there will be a program to develop a Mujib planetary climate prosperity decade, and Bangladesh will show this plan, or will launch this plan likely in at the end of March 2021. And as far as the affordability constraint as well, certainly the affordability is an issue, and COVID-19 has certainly made those issues even more stark, and clearly vulnerable developing countries will need some sort of risk-sharing mechanism with donor governments when it comes to improving the affordability of a lot of these risk transfer instruments. And this is something that I believe the actors in the InsuResilience Global Partnership would be well equipped to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahmed. There's also a question from Wasita to Ms. Siegel. How do you see innovative climate finance under the discussion of loss and damage being incorporated at country level? We speak of insurance as an option for risk transfer, but are there other options that you have noted as that are promoted by countries in the discussions of risk transfer and management? Ms. Siegel, if you are on the, yes.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, this is a complex question, but insurance is not the only tool in the toolbox in terms of dealing with risk. And I have been looking at fund approaches, and I think it depends. You have to be careful about what type of risk you're trying to address. Certainly with slower onset events, for example, insurance, which is really geared towards looking at uncertainty and the uncertainty of events. If you know that the sea level on your island, for example, is rising around your island, is rising, and that you run the risk of permanent loss of territory, then the uncertainty element isn't there, and you may need some sort of a sinking, well, that's a bad word, but a sinking fund or some sort of savings account or pension fund type of instrument for future permanent losses. It's almost like a life insurance policy as opposed to homeowners insurance or travel insurance, which are different forms of insurance, and look at different types of potential losses. So I mean, that's one very quick answer. But in terms of the example in the presentation that I made of Fiji's NDC, they're planning to use risk-based planning methods for housing and land use, for example, and they're looking at other measures, including environmental protection and conservation, and bolstering key ecosystems for populations. So those are other approaches that address the risk and aren't necessarily insurance-based. There are quite a few other examples, and I direct you to, for example, a technical paper that the UNFCCC Secretariat put together in, I think it was 2019, middle part of 2019, on sources available for financing losses and damages. And there's quite a broad compendium of innovative approaches in that paper. The Standing Committee on Finance held a forum on financing the risk of loss and damage in 2016, and the report coming out of that forum is also quite rich in terms of innovative approaches to address the risk of loss and damage. So I would sort of point you in the direction of some of those resources. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Siegel. And we have one more question from Wasita to all our panelists. And I think we could open this up beyond the panelists and anyone else who would like to contribute. So how can different issues related to trust be addressed? A lot of communities do not have a lot of trust in insurance systems. Are there any good practices that you would like to share? This also comes from some of the work on the ground that we have been doing as well as part of our research in our multi-actor stakeholder partnership. I'm wondering if any of the speakers would like to take this question. If not, if there's anyone on the call who would also like to maybe answer this question, if anyone who has experience working on the ground and who has encountered these issues while working with communities. Someone? Dr. Razak, I wonder if you would have any input to add.
Yes, thank you. Well, maybe I can share some of my experience in Malaysia, talking about community and trust. I think, yes, in some cases that some community don't feel the trust despite many effort given by the government. And one particular example that I remembered after 2014 major flood in Malaysia, there was some insurance schemes offered to the vulnerable communities, and it works for a couple of years, but it has some difficulty to upscaling the effort to the other district or vulnerable regions. So it depends from one community to another, the way they perceive the risk, how they address, how they accept some of the risks, current risks and also future risks. There are a couple of good practice, but I think in the context of Malaysia environment, I think it's still skeptical with this insurance, given the fact that some of the investment should be made. And one of the things that I observe when there is a political will or political commitments to this insurance, it works pretty well. So there are some co-funding available, then the community feel easy to commit, and whenever disaster take place, they can feel it, the impact directly. So that's some of the so-called experience back in Malaysia. And come back to the that's on flooding. But if we see some of the other type of slow onset, for example, type of disaster, you can feel it. The community need a different approach to at least increase the level of trust and ownerships, and perhaps the shared responsibility should be there as well. So that's in short from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Razak. And Ms. Vista, would you like to add anything to that? Oh.
Sure, sure. Thanks for that, for opening it up to me as well. I'm not an expert on this, but at least from I think some of the points that the previous speakers, Ms. Siegel and Dr. Razak also just mentioned are quite key to building trust. I mean, if we think about the existing insurance industry, and the participation from the communities for example, what was alluded to earlier, pension funds or homeowners insurance, etc., are being used in, universally. And I think in terms of building trust as well, advocacy, I have to come back to that point of advocacy. But what it really falls down to, in my opinion, is fundamentally who pays for the risk, and who pays, and how much can they afford to pay, and that's when the co-financing and the co-payments or lowering the cost of insurance, the premiums would really make it more palatable to the communities, instead of just handing over cash. If there are adaptation actions already being taken, which already then reduce the net impact of these risks, then the remainder can be subsidized, for example. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bista, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. And I'm very sorry to the questions that we couldn't answer. Perhaps we could take it forward in the group session, which is slightly delayed, but I think the conversation that we had now was very useful. So thank you once again to all of our speakers, and also the ones who, and also to Dr. Jayatunga and Ms. Ratna from the Disaster Management Center and the Ministry of Environment for taking time to be here and also supporting our work. Now we will open up the group work. We have two groups. We have a national group where we have specific focus questions, and we also have an international group. Each group will have a facilitator and a note taker. Please do decide perhaps at the beginning of your group work on who will be presenting. When you come back to the main plenary, the group work will run for about 25 minutes, and you'll come back here for a quick report back of about 30 to 60 seconds, and then we will close for the day. So I'll be opening up your groups. You should get a pop-up box, and kindly do join the group once you see that. Thank you, and see you soon.